Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Star Citizen Live, Targets, Turrets, and Takeoffs. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee, and if you've never seen Star Citizen Live before, it's our weekly Friday live stream where we sit back, we take questions from the community, we give answers to the community. Sometimes we watch somebody create something. We do all kinds of different things. This week on the show, we have members from the Vehicle Experience team on to answer your questions regarding the upcoming flight changes in Alpha 3.10. So without further ado, we got a lot to jump into. We're going to introduce each other to who we're talking to because it's always somebody's first show. We'll start immediately above me. Yogi, tell everybody who you are and what you do with Star Citizen.
Hi, my name is Yogi. I am a coder, a gameplay coder working in for VT.
Right. And as part of the Vehicle Experience team, what are some of the things that you contribute to? You just work on everything, or do you have specialties?
I have specialties, yeah. On everything is not work on everything is not possible. No, I am. So for 3.10, I focused on turrets mostly and on the gunnery improvements.
Okay. Then we're going clockwise over to a man who probably needs no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. Mr. CrewTube himself, Mr. John Crewe. Tell us who you are and what you do for Star Citizen.
Hi, my name's John. I'm the vehicle director for Star Citizen. So I look after all the vehicle feature, experience, and content teams.
Yep. And last but certainly not least, immediately to my left here, Richard, tell everybody who you are and what you do for Star Citizen.
Yeah. So I'm Richard, and I'm the vehicle experience product owner. So I'm just responsible for looking after the team and designing the features. And
awesome. So you basically lead the vehicle experience team specifically.
Yeah. So I basically look after what we're doing and how we're doing it and designs.
Okay.
And work closely with all the teams to make sure we're delivering our features.
Awesome. Now, if you haven't seen it, it's probably too late now. You can check it out on YouTube later. We just did a big segment on ISC last week about some of the work the Vehicle Experience team has done for Alpha 3.10. Alpha 3.10 is currently on PTU with our Evocati test flight, being put through the paces. When it's done with Evocati, it'll be opened up to a wider PTU before eventually going to our biggest test platform that we have, which is our live play environment. But until that happens, we thought we'd do a question and answer. You guys have a lot of questions about what's going on, especially after the segment. So we did our normal thing of putting up a Spectrum thread earlier this week and allowed folks to submit their questions for consideration and vote up which ones they wanted to see answered most. So we're going to start with them. Throughout the course of the show, though, you can submit new questions in Twitch chat by prefacing your question with the word question in capital letters surrounded by brackets. That's going to help our community management team pull it out from all the other chat and then send it to me so I can then give it to them and they can give it to you. All right, so starting with the questions from the thread, let's get into it. How long can VTOL ships expect to hover before they start to damage their maneuvering thrusters? This is something we've been talking about a lot, de-emphasizing maneuvering thrusters, emphasizing ships with VTOL. What do we got?
Yeah. So we don't have like a current time frame of how long they're going to currently overheat for, and this is not something that's going to be in 310, but this is something we're looking at where it's going to depend on the size of the thrusters, the amount of power the thrusters develop, and the size of the ship and the design of the ship as well. So this is something which will come in a later release, but it's not something that's going to come for 310.
Yeah, okay. Like Rich said, it's a very hard question to answer because there's so many ships with so many configurations, but generally those that have VTOLs will take longer, if at all, to get to the point where overheating damages. At the moment in 310, we do have that limit, so when they overheat, they just cut out to stop you damaging it. But in a future patch, we'll give you the option to turn that off if you're a madman, that you want to artificially risk your life.
Yeah. And I would imagine that's, of course, assuming you're using the VTOLs. Like if you haven't switched your Cutlass into VTOL mode or your Reclaimer into VTOL mode, then you're it's not providing any relief for your maneuvering thrusters at all at that point.
Yeah, if you're not using the thrusters, then they don't consume any fuel, they don't heat up, they don't have a risk of being damaged.
Okay. All right, let's move on. We're getting improved targeting for fixed weapons. Can you go into more depth on exactly what that means and how that will affect combat and fixed loadouts? We actually had a lot of questions regarding the nudging and what nudging means. So let's dive into it. What do you got, Yogi?
Okay, so nudging does not mean that we kind of like put the bullets around the corner or anything like that. Every weapon on every ship has a convergence allowance, right? At the moment, that allowance is quite high for each weapon. It's like 8 degrees. So when you target something with fixed weapons or with any other weapons, and you don't fire the target, but if the target's really close to you, then you will see that your shots will cross over in front of you. That is convergence, and this is just an inherent property of the weapon. So they can gimbal, like a little bit of gimbling in each, right? So we're using that to help the fixed weapons finding the target. I know that people would say, "Oh, wait a sec, it's auto aim," but it's not really auto aim. So assuming I'm prepared, you have a ship flying in front of you, right? So this Hornet goes into this direction, then the predicted impact point will be here. Oh yeah, right. Okay, let's say John is aiming at me, right?
I don't have a ship.
I'm
I'm
prepared, Jared. Okay.
Nobody told me you were doing
Anyways.
this. All right, go ahead, continue.
So let's assume this is like the center of the predicted impact point. What we do is when your current aim vector is intersecting with that, at some point we will start nudging the bullets towards the target, but it won't be like an instant swap, but it will be a fluent it will be a fluent ratio towards the target. So if you're really aiming good anyways, right? But if you're slightly offset, it will still nudge the bullet in this direction, but not perfectly. So it kind of like slowly fades them onto the target. What this effectively does for fixed weapons is it makes the target a little bit bigger, so it's a little bit easier to hit, but it's not auto aim. It's just an assist that we allow based on the convergence properties that the weapons have anyways. Because you could argue, hey, if the weapons can converge, why can't they go a little bit more on the target? So this is what we're doing with that, and it is really necessary. So we did a lot of gameplay tests with that, and it definitely improved the viability of fixed weapons. Not to the point that they're already on par with auto gimbals. That's something we need to fix later, but they will be more usable in 3.10.
Okay. Before we go on, we had two immediate questions. Yogi, first, what is that thing on the side of your head?
There's a track IR. It also does. Does it? Yeah, it does some light. Yeah, this is from our head tracking stuff. So I can recommend it. You sit in your cockpit, you look left, and your cockpit you look left. You can even gimbal your weapons using that, though it needs a lot of training to actually hit something with it. I wouldn't play without it nowadays.
Okay. Well, that is obviously it's a third-party product. It's not officially endorsed or anything, but we wanted to explain what it was early in the show because questions were coming. Also, as far as those ships are actually currently available with JR Fabrications. I don't know what the website is, but you can Google JR Fabrications, and they have the license to do Star Citizen spaceships. So for the folks asking about those spaceships, we'll just cover that stuff early in the show. Get past it. All right. Next question. Are we going to see any changes with the ship GUI or HUD take place with these flight changes?
Yes, but it's more along the lines of porting the in 3.9's Flash-based HUD to our own proprietary building blocks system. So everything that was there in the existing central Flash was your central heads-up display, so your throttle, your indicators for where you've got your landing gear out, your pips and reticules, moving all of those from Flash to building blocks. So they do look different. They have a slightly different arrangement, and some of them have some slightly different behavior. For example, EMP weapons have some extra information on there now, purely because it's a lot easier to do it in building blocks than Flash. So it's not like a completely radical new HUD. The targeting side is slightly different, but I think we'll talk about that later. But the actual HUD is just an updated version of what we had before. Players who had the Gladius or the Mantis or the Carrack will have got a preview of that in 3.9 anyway.
So that's just for it's state in 3.10. But going forward, we're continuing to iterate on the HUD, continuing to
So what's in 3.10 will be every single ship in the game has a HUD visuals similar to those 3 ships that I mentioned in 3.9. And on top of that, they have some extra features that weren't there in 3.9. So I think the missile and self-destruct messages had disappeared. They're back. And then that gives us the basis to then do the manufacturer styling on top of it in a later patch.
Manufacturing styling is something we've been talking about for a while now.
Yeah. Rather than just doing like a tint for a different color, they will physically look. It's going to sound stupid, but look differently styled based on the manufacturer, rather than just this one's blue, this one's green.
Will the new environment temperatures and wind features affect thruster performance?
Yes. Yeah. So the actual wind affects the flight of the ship, so it balances the thrusters. So the thrusters have to counter the kind of torque that the wind produces on the ship, and also the thrusters are affected by the atmosphere, and this depends on where you are in the atmosphere, the height. So it varies depending on the planet or moon you're on. So if you go down to Lowville, for example, the thrusters are working about 58% efficiency, 60% efficiency, whereas on a smaller moon they're working much more towards 85% of the actual total capacity of the thrusters. So you are going to feel a difference depending on where you are in the atmosphere and how thick it is. Which creates a really unique feel for each kind of planet, really.
As a follow-up question, will there be cockpit or HUD interactions or indications for wind speed and directions so that players can be warned of adverse weather conditions?
So it's definitely something we've thought about. So at the moment it's all visual, so you'll see the kind of clouds and the storm on the planet, and you'll hear the wind a lot, but we don't have anything currently on the HUD to kind of show where the wind's coming from, the direction. You kind of have to see it and feel it. But that is something we can look at in the future to kind of give a better communication of the wind and the performance of the ship, especially as we move ships much more towards the era in our side, and the lift is much more important. We'll have to communicate that kind of side to it.
Okay. Here's a common question that comes up in a lot of the ship-related and flight-related shows. Is match target speed coming back?
So that's something that was removed in 3.5, I think.
Around there.
It was with the revision of IFCS. It was something we intentionally didn't put back in. Not to say it's never going to come back. There was a lot of overhead that came with it, and a lot of miscommunication is the wrong word, but it was a lot of confusion about how it actually worked, the cost of keeping up to date. It's something we keep looking at. I know there's a sort of vocal group of people that want it back. So I'm not going to say it's never coming back, but it's not on our immediate priorities to bring back.
Yeah, I know a lot of folks want it to make things like formation flying easier and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's especially helpful for folks doing like the cinematic stuff when you got ships of different types and stuff like this, and you're trying to keep them in the frame at the same time. It's like if we could just match speed, that would make that a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. When we did the changes for IFCS, we looked at the analytics of how much all the functions get used versus the time we had to deliver the product, and it was very far down the list in terms of actual use across the game. Cut at the time.
Has cargo on ships been factored into the flight model, like an empty caterpillar versus a caterpillar full of titanium?
So yes, it has. We've built a small buffer into the ship's atmosphere. So if you've got a ship like the Caterpillar, it's not quite at the limit in its base state, so it can carry some weight, but it will be planetary dependent as well. So it is quite close to it, and you add more weight to it, let's say, you may struggle to take off on some planets with this. So you'll have to use the afterburner or use a different method to take off. And that also increases the importance of VTOL ships that can carry as well. So they'll have like an advantage on some planets where maybe they can carry more extra weight.
Okay. as a follow up there, how long will I don't maybe you don't have the exact number off the top of your head, but how long do you expect ships like the Caterpillar to be able to hover in a normal gravity environment? Or that's basically it. That goes on, but how long do you think a Caterpillar should be able to hover in a normal gravity, like we'll say Earth type gravity? I'm guessing that's normal.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a difficult one because we want it to be able to be like a limit that we have, but it's how we build up to that limit over time. It's also how we communicate that the ship is reaching its limit, for being able to hover as well. So, it does a lot of different factors to kind of make that overall time feel right in the end.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have an exact number, but it's not going to be like a instant you fall out of the sky. There will be suitable warning and time for you to do something about it.
Right. Yeah, there will be like very precise things on your heads-up display that tells you about that state. I mean, obviously, like it needs to be long enough so people can comfortably launch and land from a planet or so. But you wouldn't take like a Caterpillar into a gunship role hovering over the ground for extended periods of time.
No, you wouldn't, but I'm going to load it up with guys with rail guns and just open the doors.
That is a choice that you have.
But yeah, one of the other great things about having a live testing environment like we do, considering Star Citizen is an alpha, is that we can balance and rebalance and tweak as patches go on. So even when this fully comes online, whatever the first version of that is, if it's 150 seconds, that's not to say that it'll be 150 seconds the next patch or the patch after that. It's we adjust, we listen to feedback, we take information in, and then we make new decisions. So that is the purpose of our live testing environment. Can we get an altitude hold autopilot for when we fly around a planet, so we don't have to babysit our ships from flying straight off into space?
I think the short answer is yes. It's not something we're actively working on, but it's something we've talked about, something that makes sense. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but is when you have to factor in the altitude and then the planet and then all the wind and everything else. Like, how much do we want it to be corrected based on environment? As soon as you get a gust of wind, you want it to turn off. You start going down a rabbit hole. But yeah, it is something we've talked about, but it's not actively being worked on.
There's also the question whether it's an altitude hold or like height above ground hold or so.
Right.
Then there'll be a camp that wants one and the other, and then
right.
Do we do one upset the other? Do we do both, double the time?
Whether it's sea level or whether it's it accounts for mountains and hills.
Terrain
and stuff.
level, yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. All right. Next question. We've had a lot of talking lately about jerk and the increased weight of ships. How does the change? How do both of those change the general feel of flight in space? For example, are ships less or more responsive when they are below cruise speeds compared to 391?
Yeah. So it hasn't really changed the responsiveness of the ships in terms of the initial movement, but what it does is it changes the time it takes the ship to automatically kind of alarm back. So the ships feel heavier in that sense. So if you move the ship and then basically let go of the controls, on the bigger ships, you really feel the ship will take a lot of time to correct itself and go back to zero, whereas the smaller ships will feel responsive, compared to that, but you'll still feel a small bit of jerk in that. But it's much more prominent on the bigger ships at the moment. And again, back to your point, this is something we're putting in the game for the first time, and we're currently evaluating it ourselves. And as more players get their hands on it, we're getting more and more feedback towards how it's affected the feel of combat and the feel of flying in general. So we're kind of, it is something we're going to tune for this release, which we have, and then we're going to tune it, for the next release and the next release beyond, as well. So it's a learning process for us.
You make a great point, Richard, and it's good enough that I want to reiterate it. That 310 is the next step in Star Citizen's continuing evolution of flight mechanics. It is not the final step. So it is the next big leap forward, and it's just as important to get these changes out there to improve the player experience, but also to generate the feedback that we need to continue improving and continue iterating as things go forward. So,
and similar to like we talked about on Insights last week, I think it was last week or maybe it was the week before. It's very hard. Yeah, it's very hard to just read this or see us talking about it and go, yes, that's how it feels. You need to get in there and play it, because responsiveness is subjective. Everyone feels it differently, and just looking at a number in a spreadsheet doesn't give you that actual feeling of how it plays.
Next question is about targeting. It's not necessarily 310 related, but I want to pose it to Yogi anyway. I was playing yesterday in 310, and the new target pinning changes were in, and it was really cool in a Hammerhead to have the pilot, selecting targets, and when I was in a turret, having him send me targets and priority targets and stuff. It was very cool. This question kind of builds on that, extrapolates that to the future. Have you considered ships like the Hornet Tracker being able to play a role in designating targets? Will they be able to send other ships info to other ships like throughout a fleet?
Yes. Though the current pinning system is just the first step, so it creates like the basic logistics to do that in the long term. I mean, for now we only have like the shared pins within a ship, so you can share it with your turret gunners and so on. In the long term, we obviously want to share it with our fleet and squads and all that, but that's a bigger topic in itself, because it requires that certain communication hierarchies and all that needs to be established first. And then there's the question how that interacts with like the whole online universe and with your friends and so on. So it's a bigger question, which we can't approach yet, but it will happen eventually.
It was I can't understate how cool it was to just. I've played in the turret before, and half the time I'm just looking around trying to wonder where everything is, because you only see out the side of one ship, and then to suddenly get targets pinned for me and marked, I was like, ah! It's like I knew where to start expecting things. It was a delightful improvement.
Yeah, at some point I would like to see like a commander role that kind of like does these things on a bridge or so.
Yeah, if I'm allowed to have an opinion as a player, I just really enjoyed it.
We value your opinion, of course.
I don't think I'm often allowed to have my own opinion where it comes to Star Citizen. How does the new pip calculation UI relate to mixed loadouts like the Vanguard? Is it a unified pip to approximate a single optimal fire solution, or are multiple pips for each convergence grouping of weapons?
Okay, so a decision that we did in the past, which we're still having, is that we're having a single pip for each individual convergence group, and we have fixed and the gimbals. So if you're on the Vanguard, for example, or if you have a ship with a mixed loadout, then you will effectively see two pips. Right. And then they use the convergence to aim at their specific point they need to aim at.
Yeah, and I haven't played with a mixed loadout. There's some differential between the two pips, so you know which one is which, or
yeah.
Okay.
And of course, you can always block them as well, and then it'll put it back into one pip.
Okay. In 263, wow, that was what is 2018, 2017, 263 in 2017, yeah.
What happened to 2.7?
Yeah, well, 263. Actually, 263 would have been like January 2018. I feel like maybe.
No,
wasn't 26? Wasn't 26 2017? So 263.
So I started at CRG 2017, and 263 was still the version that was still running then.
Right. Well, like I said, all my time is blurring into each other now. Anyway, in 263, the target bracket included ship direction information, allowing players to better predict ship movement to line up fixed gunshots. Will this be returning?
So for 310, we've got the direction arrow, which shows you the direction of the ship, and also we've got a really cool trail as well, which shows you where the ship has been, so you can kind of predict where it's going next. And, you can kind of see the path of the ship. So that really helps you in combat. So even though that was before my time, that's kind of what we've got for 310.
Yeah, it's interesting to have both of those, because they're not always necessarily in sync with, especially with like decoupled flights. So it's handy to see where the ship's pointing and where it's been, because you can sort of glean some information about the person you're targeting by the way they fly, and the trail gives you that sort of clue as to how they were flying. So if you see them doing constant zigzags, the trail will give you that path, so you can perhaps expect them to do that again.
Okay. Yeah, it reads like reading your enemy and laying out your strategies to combat them.
Any updates? Are any updates being done to make EMP usage a bit more straightforward? The current system contains a bit of guesswork and a fair amount of confusion for some, myself among them.
Okay, we're just taking them. Well, I can I think there's a little bit of like more HUD work for the EMP stuff. In the future, we want to move the EMP stuff more into the missile operator mode, but that's not for 3.10. That's for post 3.10.
All right.
Yeah. There is. So to give a bit of context for those that don't know what's going on with EMP at the moment, all EMP items start off by default, and you have to manually turn them on. That's because it was a design that we wanted to try out where when they're on, they use a huge amount of power. So by having them on by default, you ended up sort of crippling the ships. You turn your ship on and then it would immediately turn off because the EMP just started absorbing all the power your ship needed. So we'd have them turned off by default. Then when you want to use them, you have to manually go turn them on. And that's an awkward step that we want to solve in the future where like if you're in an EMP ship and you hit right mouse button or secondary fire and whatever control scheme you're using, it goes EMP's offline. You're like, why is it offline? It's because it's not turned on. So we want to simplify that flow where it perhaps turns it on for you or gives you a prompt of what to actually do to turn it on rather than requiring someone to hunt through the MFTs to do it. And then it's you as a player choosing to do this big energy absorbing behavior, which means you then have to choose, like, am I going to charge this up or am I going to use all my energy weapons? Am I going to use my power for flying after burning? It's a choice you have to make between the two. That's just sort of a background as to why it's like that. And then, lots of people get confused by it.
And just a small plug, the Mantis is currently the ship of the month for subscribers for the month of July. So if you are a subscriber, you can fly around in the Mantis all month long. Next question. Let's see what do we got. Can ships with wings glide in atmosphere now?
Yes. So, but with a caveat, I'd say we've got a very basic form of gliding right now, where we've currently got the ships with a flat surface, so the wings are not shaped like wings. For example, at the moment, the ships have flat surfaces which generate lift and drag depending on how you pitch and move the ship, basically. So if you do turn off the engines, you will glide, but you won't really have control over the ship. But again, this is the first version of the atmospheric flight for these ships, and it's a really big step we've taken, but it's a step to enable us to do other things in the future. So in the future, we're looking at having control surfaces and different shaped wings, so we can actually maneuver the craft with the wings rather than the thrusters. Because at the moment, we've got wings, but the ship is still controlled by the thrusters. So you've got the wings creating lift and drag, and you force the ship over, and then you pull back, and then you get force in the corner, which allows you to pull the high G with the wings. But that is driven by the thrusters maneuvering that behavior, whereas we want that behavior to be generated by the aerodynamics itself. But again, that's a step in future releases. It's quite a complex job to add control surfaces, especially to make it visually look correct as well with all the ships. So but again, for 310, it's the first step, and we're going to get a lot of feedback, and then we can iterate on that, and then we can put that into future releases with control surfaces and make the ships even more different than they are now.
Gotcha. So in the future, is that going to extend even to things like ailerons and stuff, or is it going to get that granular?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's getting distracted by Rich's cat just lurking behind him. In 310, like Rich said, you can glide, but the thrusters sort of take over, unless you're to the point where like all your thrusters turn off, and which you will glide nicely. It depends what you were doing before your thrusters turned off.
Right.
But the version we have locally that isn't 310, where the control surfaces actually take effect, you can turn off every single maneuvering thruster and just rely on your mains and your ailerons. I think maybe the Gladius ones are actually like flaperons or something like that, because they do both behaviors.
Gotcha.
You can fly purely on the aerodynamic forces.
I saw Dave Coulson flying the Gladius without any thrusters and everything on the other day.
Actually, it's even more interesting when you fly and you have a wing ripped off or so, because that is also supported. So you get like really asymmetric lift then, and you can easily crash if somebody rips off your wing.
I had an experience with an M50 flying backwards in atmosphere last week that I won't talk about right now. Flying forward, I was good. And the second I tried to fly backwards, it was very clear the wind had a bit more control over me flying backwards than forwards. It was interesting. Speaking of targeting, that's their transition, not mine. We still only have subcomponent targeting for engines. What are our plans to expand?
So we're definitely going to expand that out to pretty much all items on a ship. We're doing it in phases because we want to bring each classification of item you can sub-target online with appropriate behavior for when you shoot them or damage them. We've talked in the past about not being easily able to get to the items inside a ship. So the next thing we'll be bringing online will be turrets and maneuvering thrusters, most likely. So you can target another ship's turrets, take them out, target another ship's maneuvering thrusters, which will then have a big impact with everything we've talked about before. So I'm not going to say every patch, but over the course of the following patches, you'll see more and more things come online to be sub-targeted.
Does that rely on the transition of all ships to have the physicalized components that we talked about in Calling All Devs last month or 2 months ago? Or?
Ultimately, yes, for like if you want to sub-target the power plant inside the ship. So we'll start on everything that's on the outside. So currently it's main thrusters, then we'll go to maneuvering thrusters, turrets, weapons, and hopefully by that point we'll have enough inside the ships in the right place for you to make choices on what to target inside there.
Gotcha. All right. Why is the Gladius capable of going 800 and 900 in Atmo when all other ships are capped at below 300?
So that's something we've been able to change with the new aerodynamics. So the ships are much more balanced now in terms of the speed that they can go in atmosphere. So we're hitting kind of that 500 meters per second kind of range in atmosphere for a lot of the small fighters. And also we've kind of gone abroad as well. We've gone and increased a lot of the larger ships, because a lot of the larger ships actually went very slow in atmosphere before because of the model we had. Whereas now we've got much more freedom to make each ship more unique. So I've kind of generally we've kind of generally sped up the ships in atmosphere. But yeah, it is fair to say that the Gladius was too quick before compared to the ships, but that's being kind of resolved for now. So it's much more fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I will say never mind. Any news on the implementation of a radar altimeter, either height above the ground underneath you as opposed to sea level? This is very necessary for low altitude flying.
It's still planned. It's not in 310, and I don't have a date for when it would be.
Okay.
It's definitely something we need.
I'm going to pair this one right up with it. How about any kind of information on the HUD about surrounding terrain? Night flying can be kind of a pain being done with only eyeballs and flashlights.
So one of the things we're looking at in the upcoming patch is improving the radar display, like the sensor globe, radar globe. And one of the things we're looking at is a way of visualizing hazards on there. What form it takes, we're not fully set on yet, but there's options there for displaying the actual terrain in it, or displaying like a generalized blob for there's a mountain in front of you here, so here's a big red blob to insinuate something to pull up. We've even discussed at times like vision modes for the helmets, like night vision or infrared, but I think it's more likely we'll go with a radar-based solution.
Like a wireframe of the terrain or something, so you still see it at night or something like that. I don't know if this is necessarily a question for you guys, but it's definitely related to the flight experience, I guess. So maybe it's you, maybe it's not. It's simply parachutes.
We do definitely need to look at ways to improve the survivability of ejecting, because there is none at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment, ejecting from a Gladius is kind of a bummer in atmosphere, right?
I don't know if it would be parachutes. It'd probably
Jetpacks?
be more like jetpacks or jet-assisted fall braking from your EVA pack. So not enough proportion that you can jetpack, but enough to not break your legs on landing.
Wingsuits?
I'd like to see that.
What can you tell us about a more in-depth missile torpedo gameplay in atmosphere with the upcoming flight changes? Will flight behaviors change? Will atmospheric flight behaviors affect missiles and torpedo performance?
Well, not in 310, but hopefully later down the line.
Yeah,
that's all there is.
Yeah, that's for a future discussion. Yeah. There will be a slight change purely based on how ships fly. Like, you're not going to be pivoting around like crazy like you were in 3.9 atmosphere, because things will be flying differently, so it will be slightly harder to lock, just because it won't be as easy to keep targets on screen. But the actual behaviors of the missiles once launched is going to be the same.
I mean, we have a lot of stuff we want to do with the missiles in the future, but it's quite big. I mean, we know that they are in multiplayer. They're kind of like the missile spam and so on can be very frustrating. But the first steps towards that will be with the missile operator mode, which is on the roadmap, and then we iterate from there.
Yeah, the whole missile and torpedo gameplay is the next focus of the team after we had wrapped up this patch's work.
Okay, so I expect we'll learn more about that next quarter.
Yeah.
Can we get? Oh no, that's the same question. Let me go. In addition to the upcoming changes to fixed weapons, turrets, and ESP, what other near or long-term changes to gunnery and controls are planned for or under consideration?
To gunnery and controls.
How long have you got?
Do it.
Okay, so I mean, gunnery is like for us, that's the process of like firing, like aiming and firing your weapons. So that we're somewhat like closing in on that. So we kind of know what kind of modes we want to have when you fire your weapons. I mean, we have fixed, we have manual or free, and then we have gimbal assist. Gimbal assist, for example, is a bit too strong. So later we want to like debuff it a little bit, but for that we need more support from the sensor systems to do that. But combat as such is undergoing a huge change at the moment. So what John just said is like in the next quarter, we're going to have like a more focus, not just on the missiles, but also especially on the weapons. So the future patches will change the way how players employ the weapons. So they need to be really careful when to employ the weapons. So they need to pick the times when they do it, and they need to decide when not to do it, because employing the weapons will have a lot of like disadvantages as well, right? Because like during combat, we want people to commit to their decisions that they do. So in this regard, there's a lot of stuff coming on. We mentioned capacitors.
I was just about to ask capacitor,
right?
Yeah.
So capacitor gameplay as such is quite interesting for us, and we're going to have this both on the weapons and on the flight model later. It's like the concept of stamina, right? So if Star Citizen were a fighting game, right? At the moment, what happens in combat, everybody's just punching, right? There's no consequence in not punching, so everybody punches. For us, that means players can tape down their fire button all the time without only with little consequence, and that will drastically change in 3.11 onwards. So you need to decide when to punch, you need to decide when to block. And so we're slowly going into that direction of having really short decision act loops, right? It's called OODA loops, like observe, orient, decide, act. So effectively using analyzing your situation, then deciding what you do, and then doing the stuff that you want to do, and having a lot of like small decisions and small loops in combat. That was like a mouthful. What I'm saying is we want the players to do a lot of important, meaningful decisions in combat. And so the capacitor changes on the weapons and later on the thrusters, they will go into that. They will help us achieving that.
Sounds like the next evolution beyond just overheating, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So the problem with overheating at the moment is that the player doesn't get a lot of information about it, right? So what we actually want to achieve in the long term is that overheating is more a consequence of like strongly overclocking your ship and being careless with it. So heat on the weapons or on the thrusters won't be the immediate thing that is limiting your performance. It will be the capacitor gameplay. So effectively, if you have an energy weapon and you tape down your fire button, your gun will be empty and cannot fire after X bullets, and then they need to recharge. And the way how it recharges and how fast it's going to be, that's all under player control and will, again, require some decisions on the player.
Okay. So capacitors are for the normal, everyday use to enforce tactics and thought and consideration. And then overheating is for the people who choose to abuse their components and max them out. I get you.
Max them out and then risk higher maintenance costs on the ships and so on.
Yeah, like you said a while back, this is the start of. It's not the final step, so it's like a three-pronged attack on the vehicle experience. So we have the flight changes that have come in 3.10. We'll have the missile operator mode, and then we have all these capacitor things, and they're all coming over upcoming patches. There was just no way we could deliver it all in one patch in one drop. So we've had to spread it out over a few, but when those three things are in together, that's when the fruits of our labor, so to speak, should be there.
Yeah, and until then, like some design decisions might not make sense for the player, but it will all come together in hopefully a couple of releases. Yeah.
Okay. With ships like the Cutlass series only having relatively large rear VTOL engines, will they not inevitably end up pitching forward rather quickly and start going down when trying to hover?
So I've got a Cutlass right here. Someone where you do balance. This is where you kind of pull there is some kind of gameplay.
Stop showing off your spaceships.
Yeah, making Jared jealous.
JRFab, send my order.
So it just comes that gameplay side where a lot of the ships were designed certain ways without knowing where we'd be kind of several years down the line, and the features we were going to model, the aerodynamics, the thruster torque and balance and all this kind of stuff. So we have to kind of do balance certain things. So if you do have a Cutlass, you're not just pitching forwards because the ship doesn't have VTOLs at the front. For example, because we don't want the ships to feel bad. We want them to make sense, but we don't want necessarily to make ships feel bad.
Yeah, but sometimes we have to. The rule of cool works both ways in terms of how a ship looks. Sort of dictates some level of performance, but if how a ship looks fundamentally cripples a ship's behavior, we're going to take steps to correct that underneath. So if Rich gets his Cutlass out again, the large VTOL thrusters, they look like large VTOL thrusters, but there are ones at the front that behave like VTOL thrusters to offset that. Otherwise you'd have the same size thrusters on the back at the front, or vice versa.
I have ships; they're just still in the office. It just.
You live like 2 minutes from the office.
I know. Where was I going to go with this? I forgot. I had a follow up and I lost it. As Chris would often say, take it to the point of realism, then bring it back to the point of fun. Will we see acceleration increases? Currently, they are so low you cannot use 6 Degree of Freedom without it feeling like you are sliding on ice for single fighter ships.
So that's a very specific measure. So it's hard to answer that because we don't know yet. Like we have a we have a vision what combat should be, and we're going to tune the ships towards that vision in the long term, right? Just saying increased accelerations might improve a certain aspect, but it might break other aspects of the game. The answer is we don't know yet. We'll see how how in the following quarter the combat evolves and develops, and then we're going to decide what we're going to do with the accelerations. I mean, we don't want to just increase accelerations. We want to make a fun flight model. So maybe.
Yeah, and again, it ties back into what I said earlier. It's what it feels like. A lot of people tend to get into the data crunching. This value was 0.9 in this patch, and now it's 1.7 in this patch. It's terrible. But does it feel better? Does it make the game better from being those values?
Right. In the ISC segment, John, you mentioned that not wanting combat to be a DPS race. For combat to not be a DPS race, meaningful maneuvers are needed for positional combat on a macro and micro level. Currently, one can backstrafe and just hold a target in a cone, and the other person cannot push back on the strafer efficiently. Will you lower retro acceleration for more meaningful combat to take place?
I think Yogi touched on this with his last question about capacitors. So the capacitors will help there because it's using your retro thrusters will have consequences to your thrust capacitor. So if you just hammer like boost or afterburn on your retros constantly, you're going to run out a lot quicker than someone coming forward. So then you're going to be at a disadvantage. So that's where that will get stopped. Maybe not stopped, but it won't be the default. Yeah, it won't be the default scenario.
I mean, we do have internal PvP prototypes with like customized tunings where we achieve this positioning knife fighting quality in the normal dogfighting, right? But these things are really like heavily dependent of the projectile velocities and other aspects. So this whole topic is way too big to just being put in like in one single release with like one statement like, yep, let's cut backstrafe or something like that. So we need more time to work on that. So and this happens over the course of the next quarter. So we have like a little side project going on at CIG, which is called Iterative Combat Testing, and within that group, so it's not just VET people, but it's also people from our user research department, which includes Bayer, who used to be a very successful PvP player in Star Citizen in this.
I like the way you say used to.
Yeah, he still is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's pretty good. Yeah. So
he was all right.
So we're working a lot with him to just iterate over the combat and narrowing down on the experience that we actually want to have. So, and we have enough test results that suggest that we can reach this positional knife fighting kind of dogfight again. But it's like the whole work that needs to be done to implement this properly is way too much for one release. So, I mean, the first gunnery changes on the turrets and the fixed weapons that 3.10 will have are actually a result out of the from the testing that happened. We kicked it off I think in March, and we still continue to develop things there. So over the next courses of releases, we will move more stuff over to the main dev branch. Will eventually end up in player hands.
Yeah, I saw a question fly up in the chat a while back about engages being different between 3.9 and 3.10. 3.10 does bring them in, but these changes we're talking about capacitors bring them in another step. So you get that more visceral, positional knife fighting with spaceships combat experience rather than just two tiny pixels flying around.
Never mind, I won't go there. Any thoughts about helmet or windshield polarization and other improvements that might allow us to see better on super bright planets, or heck, even in space when you just turn towards the sun?
So in 3.10, we have actually enabled, or not enabled, the graphics team provided a nice new little bit of tech to make the central flight HUD dynamically adjust its brightness based on the environment. So When you're in deep dark space, it dims down, so it's not blowing out the eye adaptation. When you're in light environments, it ramps itself up so you can actually see it against like white clouds, or if you're on yellow or microtech when you're in a snowstorm, it'll be bright enough with a drop shadow that you can see. Maybe if you point it directly into the sun, it won't quite deal with that, but for 90% of the environments, it works. There are a few quirks that didn't make it into 3.10, so not every single element on the HUD reacts like that. So 3.10 is just the flight HUD. We need to expand that to things on the lens, such as the reticules and like mission markers, so they do the same thing. The ATC gates in the VJoy ATC gates in environments, because they're technically rendered on the lens rather than on the visor. They can't take advantage of it. So there's more to come there.
That's certainly great news for the HUD. You still lose targets in the sun on a really bright planet, or in space if somebody flies in the sun. And I suppose that that's an appropriate tactic if you can utilize it as well.
It's a tried and tested combat tactic.
Yeah, still sunglasses. Let's see. Will NPC ships reap any benefit from these new improvements and maybe become more deadly?
They take advantage of it as players do. It's purely down to AI behaviors. I wouldn't say they're any worse than before.
Actually, 3.10 has a couple of IFCS bug fixes that makes them not cheat anymore. There was like there was like a bug that when an AI ship pulled up, then the acceleration and the rotation was way bigger than it used to be, and so like certain ships could like instantly turn around, and now they're actually limited to what they are actually capable of. So that rather like streamlines the whole experience. In terms of weapon, I think AI ships do not use fixed assist. That's for players only.
I think it's probably a question we'll follow up on with the AI team. We're going to be talking to them later next quarter, so we'll see if we can hear what their plans are for how they want to incorporate atmospheric flight, the new atmospheric flight stuff into their plans. Any changes you're prepared to talk about regarding G-forces, blackouts, redouts, stuff like that? How do these new changes affect that?
So the GeForce model is still the same that we had before, but we have it in our backlog to change it a little bit because we're not really satisfied with the effects it produces. So yeah, but it's like, as far as I know, it's on the backlog. I'm not sure what the other plans are.
It is the same GeForce model, but you do hit, with the changes to how atmospheric flight happens, you do hit it in different ways than before as well. Like, because obviously you're doing completely different maneuvers than you did in 3.9. You can do really big bank, steep turns or stalls, which just you wouldn't have been able to do before in 3.9. So you never would have got to the point of the GeForce redouts and blackouts having an impact on gameplay.
Yeah, he's pulled some really serious G-forces as well. We're pulling some crazy, kind of future kind of G-forces of these things, but also, with the G-force itself, we're looking at, again, it's like managing your capacity to withstand G-force is something that, real fighter pilots do. So, if you pull a G for like 15 seconds, the next time, if you go into it straight away, you're not going to last 15 seconds. You're going to last 10 seconds. And if you do it again, you're going to last maybe 5 seconds. Nice. So again, it's about that management of your own personal, kind of resistance to G-force, really. So that's going to play a part in the future as well.
I suppose there's always that challenge of knowing how things are today in the 21st century, and then extrapolating what might be possible for the 30th century. Of Star Citizen, and it's like what things should be solved by then, story wise, but then what things do you not want solved because you want to maintain a gameplay experience that's what people expect today. I guess Star Trek had like inertial dampers that just removed all G-force entirely, so their ships can do whatever at any given time. So I suppose it's always a weird balance. We've talked a lot about atmospheric flight today. let's talk about gravity. How does gravity affect? How does gravity of the various planets and the size of the planets and stuff affect flight in 310 or going forward?
It affects the amount of thrust you need to, keep level. So if you've got, again, a big planet like Lorville, you've got much more pull pulling you down to the surface. Whereas if you've got a moon, you can hover there pretty easily. It's fine. So it does play a part in the overall flight experience. Which again makes all the planets feel different.
Yeah, it's that combination of gravity and atmosphere, because they're not all the same. They all have different combinations of gravity strength from 1 to 0, and different atmospheric strengths and different environmental effects. Like some of them have windstorms on them, some of them have ground snowstorms. So it really is a varied experience. Your ship is not going to behave the same if you take it to every single moon and planet in Star Citizen.
Okay. In the ISC segment, we showed how the atmospheric planes and everything change for transforming ships. Like the Reliance fly differently in atmosphere vertically than horizontally. The changes in the Car-to-Wall. So like this. This question from the chat is asking if that extends to things like opening cargo doors and stuff. Will that affect the flight performance of a ship if you open up every single door on the side of a caterpillar, on both sides of the caterpillar? Does that now handle differently than if they were closed?
So it doesn't currently, but this is something we've talked about with doors and also landing gear as well. So this is all things now. Now we've got the system, we can build in these bespoke effects. So if you take off and you leave your landing gear down, that's going to cause drag. If you take off, you leave a door open, that can cause drag. So it's just a question of how we implement this across all the ships. But that is definitely something we've talked about, and it's definitely something that's going to come in a future release.
Yeah, something like the Carrack or the even the Starlifter that can open up the front door and the rear door and just let a whole bunch of air pass through underneath.
Yeah, that's not going to fly well.
I wouldn't want to be inside it when that happens.
Okay. Let's see what else we got. We are almost out of time, gentlemen. Just a couple more questions. There have been a fair amount of questions in the chat today, just about the Cutlass in general. I know we did a show about the ships just 5 weeks ago. I think it was just 5 weeks ago, yeah. But since there are so many questions, any changes regarding the Cutlass? Anything you can tell us about the Cutlass? John, why do you hate the Cutlass?
I don't hate the Cutlass. I hate all ships equally. I don't have a favourite. I don't have a worst. So the Cutlass specifically, the only real change to it in 310 is it's got some armor. So we did a pass on pretty much every ship. We added the armor items to them and gave them all some primarily manufacturer-derived baselines. So Drake ships have better armor absorption values than some of the other ships, at the expense of maybe some shield performance. And the Buccaneer and the Caterpillar got some buffs in terms of their weaponry as well. So trying to just improve the usability of the Drake lineup, because to looking at the analytics, the Cutlass fares quite well, despite the amount of noise that we get. If you look at all the data, even accounting for the fact that everyone has a Freelancer at the moment, the Cutlass, all the Cutlass variants actually outperform it in the metrics that we have to look at internally. But the Buccaneer and the Caterpillar really did struggle. So for 310, Buccaneer's weapon and missile mounts have been swapped over. So if you lose a wing, you don't lose all your guns. The coolers and the fuel tanks don't fall off the slightest breeze anymore. So again, if you lose a wing, you don't fall out the sky. The Caterpillar command module guns have all been upgunned a bit, so it has a bit more firepower. The Dragonfly and the Nox got a change to increase their speed and lower their ground hugging ability. So hopefully 310 should see a bit of a usability improvement for Drake owners.
And so I expect folks when the patch goes live, check out the patch notes for the full list of all those changes that are coming in 310. last question, second to last question, I guess, before we let you go. Let's see how granular this gets. We've talked about, we know how wind affects flight in atmosphere. We know how gravity will affect flight in atmosphere. How big a factor is temperature in the atmospheric flight of ships? Will it affect things like the overheating of ship components at all? Does it change anything about air resistances or something like that? How big a factor is temperature? And is it a factor, I guess?
In 310, it isn't a factor, but it is something that we want to do. So like, if you fly your ship down to an ice planet and you leave it there turned off for a few hours and you come back to it, its boot up time to the point it can operate will take longer. If you're flying in a lava volcano planet somewhere in Pyro, you are going to overheat quicker than you would in deep space. So we do plan for that to have an effect, but in 310 it doesn't. I don't know if the current temperatures affect the pressure on the planets. That's not really our area, but if it does affect the pressure, then it will affect the handling.
Fair enough. And last question before we let you go from the chat. Richard, can your cat come on the show next week, even if you're not here?
Yeah, I can ship him to whoever's on the show. If you let us know, I'll put him in a box. Well, he's just staring at me right now. It's called Rocky, and he's very hungry because it's his feeding time, and he's just sat staring at me now.
Fair enough. All right, well, that's it for our show, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of a busy Wednesday to Wednesday. Wow, that wasn't even on purpose.
Busy Wednesday.
Busy Wednesday. It's Friday. It's July. It's July 3rd. It's a holiday weekend here in the United States. For folks in the United States watching, Happy Independence. For folks in the UK watching, Happy. No, I'm just kidding. I thought it was Wednesday, just like a minute ago. I thought it was Wednesday, so don't listen to a thing that I say.
You also nearly forgot your name at the start.
I know. Yogi, John, Richard, and Rocky, thank you so much for being here on the show with us this week. Guys, as we are wont to do lately, we are going to throw the host over to a Star Citizen streamer who's broadcasting right now. I am being told it is Flying Sparrow, who, if I'm not mistaken, has a cat of her own on her stream. So you can check that out. The host should start any minute now. So opt in. Tell him Rocky says hi when you go for Star Citizen Live. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week.